Here we're looking at 3 generations of 70 class GPUs, but some of the comparisons are going to be a little hard to do because the 3070 has 8 gigabytes of VRAM. The 4070 and 5070 have 12, and that means that in games like Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, if I just set 1080p Supreme settings, the 3070 literally crashes, so I have to reduce it to medium textures, which still for the most part looks good, but it means these aren't exactly like for like tests. Do keep that in mind. That being said, now the 3070 can get to the mid 80 FPS range while the other two cards are over 100. If we go up to 1440p and use those medium texture settings, the 3070 can average over 60 FPS now, albeit its 1% lows, which you can see spikes on this frame time graph, aren't great, indicating we're still actually probably a bit beyond the settings that are appropriate to the 8 gigabyte card. The other two cards are cruising right along at 85 and 97 respectively, a 14% advantage for the 5070 versus the 4070. Can we really compare percentage-wise to the 3070 if it's running different settings? That's another thing where we should talk about the differences in frame generation support. The 30 series cards do not support NVIDIA frame generation, although you can use third-party apps like lossless scaling, which does provide frame generation, albeit at reduced quality since it doesn't have access to game data, or you can use AMD frame generation that is built into some games, although depending on which version of AMD frame generation, it's not always compatible with DLSS upscaling. Speaking of DLSS upscaling, the 30, 40, and 50 series all support the latest DLSS 4 transformer model for upscaling, just not for frame generation. Now, for the cards that support frame generation, the 40 series supports ×2 mode, and the 50 series supports ×3 and 4 mode, as well as ×2 mode, and we should talk. Because notice that the latency numbers here are not better on the 5070 compared to the 4070, and honestly, neither one's that much better than the 3070, despite the overall frame rates here being so different. So let's pause this for a second, maybe actually go back while I'm talking a little bit. So look at the frame rates here. Mid-30s, mid-80s, 175. Generally, when you have such a high frame rate, you get a much more responsive experience, but that's not what happens with these different levels of frame generation. What you get is increased motion fluidity as long as your monitor can go that high in hertz. So basically, frame generation inserts frames between frames the game actually rendered, but those frames aren't really responsive, so it's not increasing the responsiveness of the game, which traditionally you get with a higher frame rate. However, there's really two reasons why a high frame rate is generally beneficial. One is that increased responsiveness, and that's what you want in competitive titles. But the other thing you get is increased motion fluidity. When like camera pans and objects move on screen, it looks smoother at a higher frame rate, and frame generation does get you that, but it's sometimes along with some visual artifacts. Now, if you have a high enough base frame rate, it does tend to feel responsive enough, even if it's not more responsive, and a high enough base frame rate tends to look pretty good in most games and be pretty usable. So think of it as smoothing out the motion on a high refresh rate display, but not really increased performance in terms of responsiveness, if that makes sense. Here we can see that the responsiveness is fairly equal between the 4070 and 5070, and a bit better than the 3070 just because it's at a pretty low overall frame rate. Whereas the 5070 would be able to take advantage of a higher refresh rate display. So if you have like a 240 Hz, 360 Hz display, the increased levels of frame generation on the 5070 can be useful there, but it's not very useful from taking a low frame rate experience and making it a high frame rate experience because the overall responsiveness would still feel pretty bad. So it's a nice feature to have on the 5070, but it's not really true raw performance. So once we move on from this point in the video, we're gonna be turning frame generation off. Just realize that in many games, these different levels of frame generation would be available. Now, before we get any further in this though, we should also talk a bit about current pricing because it's not great. So if you're watching this video as of the time of filming, availability for 5070s is very bad, and you're generally spending at least $600 or $700 if they're in stock, oftentimes closer to the $700 plus range, even though its MSRP is meant to be $550. Now, if you're looking for a good deal in the current market, I highly recommend looking at used graphics cards, and Jawa.gg is the place to buy, sell, and upgrade between gamers. Also, I can get you $10 off your first purchase at Jawa using code ON10 in the sponsored link in the video description and or pinned comment. Now, not only are the used GPUs going to be a great deal, but also you can buy entire pre-built systems because honestly, if you're upgrading from an older part, you might need to upgrade the whole system. Or if you're getting overwhelmed with the whole buying individual parts and all of that, just finding the perfect PC right there. You can shop by what kind of parts you want, what kind of performance you want, what your budget is, as well as different themes, which is awesome because I know for a lot of people, putting together a great theme is a huge part of the build. It's a showpiece in your room, a statement of your personality. Also, to fund your upgrade, sell your old parts. You can list your own listings on Jawa yourself. You can even make it a side business, but you can also get instant offers on your CPU or GPU from Jawa directly. Instant offers take all the hassle out of it, which is super convenient. But again, you can set your own price and make your own listings as well. Tons of great user reviews and testimonials, peripherals available, all of that. And again, I can get you $10 off your first purchase using code ON10. Now, a huge thank you to Jawa sponsoring today's video because that allows me to run the massive numbers of tests that I did here. Speaking of which, let's get into it. Now, I already showed that RT overdrive mode with frame generation kicked on, but if you look at the base frame rates before you kick on frame generation, that'll give you more of an idea of how responsive it'll be. And again, the 3070 doesn't have access to the frame generation at all. If we try to do 1440p RT overdrive with DLSS balanced using the new transformer model, which again, the 3070 does support the new upscaling model, here the 3070 is only getting 34 FPS, whereas the 4070 is getting 51, and the 5070 is getting 58. So you'll notice here that there's a big jump from the 3070 to the 4070. That's a 50% jump, but a much smaller jump from the 4070 to the 5070. And the 5070 is 71% faster than the 3070. On average, it's going to be less than that. Part of that's using the new transformer model. Part of it's potentially going over 8 gigabytes of VRAM here. It's pretty close. Anyway, none of the GPUs are really knocking it out of the park here, but it's certainly a lot more playable on the newer GPU. So 1440p path tracing is going to be an edge case even for the 5070, and the other cards are even more questionable on how useful that's going to be. More realistically is something like RT Ultra settings. Here we're seeing 1080p RT Ultra with no upscaling, so you could use like quality level transformer upscaling from here if you wanted, and honestly the new transformer model does still look pretty decent even at 1080p. Here the 3070 is hitting 47 FPS, the 4070 is 36% faster at 64 FPS, and the 5070 is hitting 73 FPS, putting it 55% faster than the 3070, but again, less of a gap between the 5070 and the 4070 overall. Now, if we jump up to 1440p at RT Ultra, again, this is not the RT overdrive path tracing mode, even RT Ultra is a bit too much for all of these cards at a native 1440p. The 3070 is way down there at 22 FPS, and if you look at the VRAM stats on the other cards, it's pretty clear we're going over 8 gigabytes of VRAM here, and that's causing massive loss to performance on the 3070 as it has to access system RAM. The 4070 is hitting 39 FPS, still not great, but 77% faster than the 3070, and the 5070 is hitting 45 FPS. Sure, it's a little more than double the performance of the 3070, but I still don't think it's really knocking it out of the park here. That being said, you can use the new transformer model of DLSS, where even at the quality setting, and I really think with the transformer model, you could be more aggressive and go to the balanced mode, even at 1440p. Now the 5070 is hitting 76 FPS, so very usable, and that's before kicking on any frame generation. I think that is a decent base from which to use frame generation. The 4070 is hitting 67 FPS, so again, still pretty reasonable there. And again, you're not noticing a massive difference between the 4070 and the 5070. The 3070, on the other hand, is down at 49 FPS, so here it's playable, but you might want to reduce settings or be more aggressive on the DLSS upscaling choice, that kind of thing. So if we go ahead and move forward to Silent Hill 2, This is an Unreal Engine 5 game, and it's one of the ones that support hardware-accelerated ray tracing version of Lumen. Here we can see that the 5070 is hitting 73 FPS. It's totally comfortable here, and it's 49% faster than the 3070. Whereas the 4070 is hitting a little over 60 FPS average at 63, putting it 29% faster than the 3070. And the 3070 is somewhat playable in this slow pace of a game at 49 FPS, but it's not really a great experience at those settings. If we move up to 1440p max settings with Epic with the hardware ray tracing turned on, even the 5070 is unable to average 60 FPS. Here it's averaging 50, which puts it 52% faster than the 3070, which is only averaging 33. The 4070 comes in at 45 FPS, so 36% faster than the 3070 and much closer to the 5070. Again, only a 5 FPS difference here between the 4070 and the 5070. If you go ahead and kick on DLSS quality, though, frame rates get a lot better, where the 5070 is now hitting 75, and the 4070 is hitting 65. The 3070 is only coming in at 49, so you'd still probably want to reduce settings, although in this game, you know, it's not super fast-paced, so you could play that on a VRR display and have a reasonable experience. But what if we kick off the hardware ray tracing, but otherwise stick to the max settings? So 1080p Epic settings, but just using the software-based Lumen rather than hardware, the 3070 is now perfectly usable at 55 FPS on a variable refresh rate display in this slow pace of a game. It's fine. You could still turn things down, though, to get a higher frame rate. The 4070 is 38% faster at 76 FPS, so good experience there. The 5070 is hitting 89 FPS, putting it 62% ahead of the 3070. At 1440p Epic settings, but again without the hardware RT, only the 5070 averages over 60 FPS, hitting 61, whereas the 3070 is all the way down there at 40 FPS, so you would want to adjust the settings or use upscaling. And the 4070 is hitting 52 FPS, so hitting a 30% advantage compared to the 3070, and kind of between the 5070 and the 3070. You could kick on DLSS quality on the 1440p Epic settings, and that now gets even the 3070 up close to 60 FPS at 56. The 4070 is hitting 78 FPS, which is 39% faster than the 3070, and the 5070 is all the way up there at 93 FPS, putting it 66% faster than the 3070. So getting a good experience here on all the GPUs, but certainly a much higher frame rate experience on the 5070 and 4070. Let's go ahead and look at a competitive title, because I want to remind you that, okay, maybe we're not seeing super high frame rates on the 3070 at max or near max settings in the latest big AAA games. However, if you're just somebody who mostly plays competitive online games, and you're somebody who turns down graphic settings to get a competitive edge, both in frame rate and visibility, because a lot of times at the lower settings, you actually have a better visibility at spotting enemies, there's less clutter, foliage, things like that. Well, here, notice that the 3070 can easily get you a good experience. 164 FPS in Call of Duty Black Ops 6 at the basic preset at 1080p. Now, that being said, if you're on a 240 Hz display or something like that, the 4070 and 5070 do a better job of maxing that out at 232 and 244. And notice here that the 5070 and 4070, this is the closest result we've seen so far. There is not a big separation between the 5070 and 4070 here. At 1440p basic settings, again, all the GPUs are doing fine. The 3070 is hitting 120 FPS average here, and that's not even using upscaling. The 4070 is at 165, and the 5070 is at 176. So again, they are getting you a better experience. The 4070 is 38% faster than the 3070, and the 5070 is 47% faster than the 3070. Again, not a wide separation between the 4070 and 3070 here. But again, this is a good experience on the 3070. So if you're mostly playing these competitive multiplayer games at low settings, the 3070 might still be doing just fine, and you could maybe hold out for an upgrade. Again, you could even kick on DLSS quality. If we do that, the 3070 is now up to 154 FPS. The 4070 climbs to 213, putting it 38% faster than the 3070, and the 5070 climbs to 228 FPS, putting it 48% faster than the 3070, but not a lot faster than the 4070. If we move on to a game like Final Fantasy XVI, though, We can see based on the 1% lows and spikes in the frame time graph, again, bad 1% lows, big spikes in the frame time graph, that even at 1080p, the ultra settings are going beyond 8 gigabytes of VRAM. So while the 3070 is averaging 54, it's getting a stuttery experience and bad 1% lows. The 4070 is hitting 75 FPS and the 5070 is hitting 85. So much better experiences on those GPUs. At 1440p, the 3070 just overall is kind of tanking performance now. The 1% lows are bad, but so is the overall averages, hitting 33 FPS. Again, though, you could reduce the graphics settings. However, on the cards with enough VRAM, like the 4070 and 5070, frame rates are much better at 52 and 61 respectively. So not absolutely perfect, and only the 5070 is breaking 60 FPS, but the 4070 is not having a bad experience or anything like that. And if you kick on DLSS quality but keep the ultra settings otherwise, now the 5070 is climbing to 86 FPS and the 4070 is at 72. So you can very much get a good experience here on these cards. But notice that the 3070, even though we're using DLSS, is still not really keeping up. And the average difference is much lower for the 3070 here compared to other titles, indicating that there's still a VRAM bottleneck happening here. Explaining why the other cards are so much faster in this title compared to others. Now, if we move to God of War Ragnarok, though, ultra settings are running just fine on an 8 gigabyte card, and the 3070 is able to hit 1080p max settings at 74 FPS average, so easily maxing this game out at 1080p. The 4070 hits 89 FPS, only putting it 20% faster than the 3070, and the 5070 hits 105. So it's 42% faster than the 3070 here. So in this particular game, it seems like the 30 series card is able to stay closer to the 40 and 50 series compared to the average result that we see in other titles. Now at 1440p Ultra, the 3070 is still hanging in there, and there's no signs of a VRAM issue. Getting an almost 60 FPS average on the 3070 at 59 FPS, and the 4070 is going up to 73, giving it 24% advantage over the 3070, and the 5070 is hitting 88 FPS average, putting it 49% faster than the 3070. So it is noticeably faster on the newer cards, but the 3070 is putting up a good fight here, and that's still at ultra settings. You could also turn down graphics settings. You could also, upscale, things like that. Now, another bit, Unreal Engine 5 game, the last one we tested was Silent Hill 2. Here's Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga. At 1080p high settings, do keep in mind high is the highest settings this game has to offer. There's no epic or ultra or anything like that. 3070 keeps up pretty well at 54 FPS average on a variable refresh rate display. That would be fine on this slow paced of a game. It's a lot of just walking and looking around slowly. The 4070 hits 72 FPS average, though, putting it 33% faster than the 3070, and the 5070 hits 80 FPS average, putting it 48% faster than the 3070, but only 8 FPS faster than the 4070. If we go to 1440p high settings, the cards are having a little more trouble here. The 3070 is only at 40 FPS, the 4070 hits 51, and the 5070 hits 57. So only the 5070 is really very comfortable here at the 1440p max settings. But again, you don't have to play at max settings. You could reduce those. Another option is to kick on DLSS, and even just using DLSS quality, even the 3070 jumps to an almost 60 FPS average at 59, whereas the 4070 hits 77 and the 5070 hits 84. So really just kicking on DLSS quality, all of these cards do a good job in this game. And again, this is a game that's pretty comfortable at a lower frame rate than a lot of other titles, given its slow-paced nature. Now, not every game is as demanding as Hellblade 2 at max settings. Ghost of Tsushima at max settings, for example, still looks great with its stylized art, but the 3070 is able to hit 84 FPS here. The 4070 can hit 109, putting it 30% faster than the 3070. And the 5070 hits 120 FPS, putting it 43% faster than the 3070, but not a lot faster than the 4070. At 1440p max settings, the 3070 is still able to average over 60 FPS here at 63, whereas the 4070 hits 78 and the 5070 is at 87. So here the 4070 is 24% faster than the 3070 and the 5070 is 38% faster than the 3070. At Horizon Forbidden West max settings, here we're actually seeing some signs of an 8GB VRAM issue. Notice that while the averages are okay on the 3070 at 66, the 1% lows are much lower, and we see some more spikes on the frame time graph compared to the other GPUs. So realistically, going down to the high or medium settings, at least for textures, would be appropriate on the 3070. The 4070 and 5070 are fine with their 12GB VRAM buffers, hitting 104 FPS average and 121 FPS average, respectively, and again, doing much better in the 1% lows than the 8GB card. At 1440p very high settings, so max settings, the 3070, once again, is reasonable on the averages at 50 FPS, although realistically you'd want to use DLSS or turn down some settings. But again, a bit of a spikier frame time graph, so probably turn down some settings on the 3070. The 4070 hits 76 though, so it's doing just fine, and the 5070 is at 89, so doing just fine there. And again, we can see that there's the larger percentage leads for the 4070 and 5070 compared to the 3070 than our typical results. Again, likely due to a VRAM issue on the 3070. And that's the tests that I ran. Let's go ahead and pop out for some final thoughts. Now, how about we break this out in graphs? And first we'll look at the 5070 versus the 3070, because one reason you clicked on this video might have been, I have a 3070. Should I upgrade to a 5070? How much better is it? So this is the summary of those results. The numbers here on each bar is not the frame rate, it's the average percentage uplift of the 5070 when compared to the 3070. Overall, the geo-mean of these results gets us that the 5070 is 58% faster on average. However, you can see some of these are outliers, and these outliers are the games where we saw a VRAM issue on the 3070. Leading to an outsized lead for the 5070, meaning that if you adjusted the graphic settings in the game to be appropriate to the 8GB VRAM buffer on the 3070, the lead for the 5070 would likely decrease to be closer to the average result. So with those outliers removed, this average would drop a few percent, but not a lot. It's still going to be in probably the mid 50% range, since it's just a few outliers and the geo-mean is fairly resistant to outliers as well. Anyway, the point is, you're getting over a 50% uplift as well as a 50% VRAM increase going from 8 to 12, and you get access to frame generation, including multi-frame generation. So there really is a substantial uplift when going from the 3070 to the 5070. So if you're asking yourself, are you gonna get a meaningfully better experience on the 5070 compared to the 3070? I would say the answer is a definitive yes, although it's not like a doubling of performance or anything like that. A 50% increase is like going from 60 to 90, or from 40 to 60. That kind of a thing, going from 100 to 150. That's a 50% increase, but again, the increased VRAM capacity means that you can also play at higher settings without having to worry about VRAM, things like that. Anyway, so there's a lot of nice to haves here on the upgrade. The question is really just, is the 5070 the best choice for your upgrade? And I've done other videos comparing the 5070 to cards like the 9070, the 9070 XT, and things like that. Because basically this answers the question, would you get a meaningful upgrade going to the 5070? Yes. Is it the best card in the current market? Like I said, current pricing is bad. Used GPUs, like I said, checking out Jawa for used stuff, things like that. Again, don't forget the $10 off your first purchase using code OWEN10. Again, all of that is something to certainly consider. Now, let's go ahead and look at some of the other comparisons we could make. So what about the 3070 jumping to a 4070? For example, what if you found a used 4070 on the market? Well, that's still a substantial uplift compared to the 3070. Here on average, it's 38% faster than the 3070, although again, some of that result is outliers due to the VRAM issues, and again, so the average would decrease a bit if we always played at settings that were appropriate to 8GB. That being said, part of the upgrade does get you more VRAM and get you settings that don't have to worry about that. So the overall average is more than 30%, but if you were just looking at raw performance rather than VRAM related, it'd be in the lower to mid 30s as opposed to 38%. Anyway, so that's a noticeable upgrade for sure. Although, for me personally, I do kind of find 50% upgrades or more to be more compelling, to be worth the hassle of swapping out the GPU and all that. So really the 4070 would just be dependent on, could you get a good deal on a 4070, and maybe, how much can you sell your 3070 for? Again, Jawa.gg, you can list your card, all of that. But let's also go ahead and take a look at the other comparison we could make from this results. What about the 5070 versus the 4070? Because in all of my side-by-side footage, I was calculating percentages with the 3070 as the baseline. But what if you set the 4070 as the baseline and compared the 5070 to that? Well, you'll notice that it's not a massive upgrade. So the 5070 on average in these tests is only 14% faster than the 4070 on average. Some results were less than that, some were more, but the geo mean is 14%. That's just not huge. So if you have a 4070 and you're wondering, should you get a 5070? I mean, it's better, but it's not really worth the hassle of the upgrade, in my opinion. You get access to higher levels of frame generation, but realistically, if you're already at around 60 FPS, which is where I'd recommend being before kicking on frame gen, then the ×2 mode gets you over 100 FPS. If you use like the ×4 mode, maybe that gets you like 200-ish, but a lot of people might not even be on a display that supports that kind of thing, and there's no point in going above your display refresh rate using frame generation, because it's not increasing your responsiveness. It's just motion fluidity, so if your display can't show it to you, it doesn't even help. The point is, yeah, the 5070 is a little better than the 4070, but this is a really underwhelming generational uplift. Like, really underwhelming. So, I don't know, guys. That's the result that we get. And unlike the jump from the 3070 to the 4070, which again, we've already shown was a much bigger percentage gain. Here we're seeing 38% faster, and it gets you a 50% increase to VRAM. Going from the 4070 to the 5070 gets you absolutely no increase to VRAM. 12 gigabytes, while it's a lot better than 8, is still kind of borderline in some situations, and as time goes on, you might get yourself trapped in that, situation the 3070 is in right now, where 8 gigabytes was kind of borderline when it was new, and now it's showing a lot of issues. 12 gigabytes is kind of borderline right now, it's mostly okay, but it could start showing issues if you keep this card for several years. So getting only a 14% raw performance uplift and no VRAM increase, 12 to 16 would have been really nice to see. This is really not a compelling generational uplift. I guess we could just leave it at that. So if you had a 4070 and you're watching this video to see if you should upgrade to a 5070, I would say, I mean, if it was a free upgrade, sure, but don't pay a lot of extra money just to go from a 4070 to a 5070. Anyway, that's where we're at. Don't forget to check out Jawa.gg to buy, sell, and upgrade. You can list your card for. I'm clicking all the wrong buttons, guys. You can list your card to fund your upgrade. I can get you $10 off your first purchase using code OWEN10. And again, a huge thank you to Jawa sponsoring today's video.